In this video I'm going to remove all of the suspension arms of the front of the Elan. That includes the two halves of the upper wishbone and the supporting bracket for the lower wishbone plus the main bracket. I'm sure they have technical names that I will be adding on. And the drop link and the anti-roll bar. Now I'm going to only film half of it because there's no need to show the other half. And let's get started. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is release the hub nut because I will want to push the drive shaft back in order to remove the top nut from the top ball joint nut. So in order to do that, I'm just gonna wedge this little crowbar in here so that the brake won't rotate anymore, and then I'm just going to unlock it. So the next thing that I'm going to do is just remove the lower ball joint first so that I can then clear access, remove the drive shaft and then get access to the top ball joint. So all I have to do is just undo the nut. Okay, so that's the nut out of the way. Now I just need a ball joint splitter to split the ball joint from the hub. So that's the lower parts free now. And now in order to proceed, I'm going to remove the brake hose so that I can remove the whole hub assembly together with the brake caliper. Now before we start, there will be some leftover liquid that we want to catch. And back on the opposite side, now we got two things to do: upper ball joint and steering arm. I'm going to do the steering arm first because after that I get easier access to the upper ball joint and then everything comes out. But I will probably reattach the steering arm before we move on. But again, easy task, just undo the bolt. So ball joint splitter again. I'm gonna try a fork with wider arms. It turns out that the arms were too narrow on the other fork. So, lesson to learn: if one fork doesn't use, get a fork with a different distance between the arms. And yeah, this will need a new rubber boot. We'll deal with that later. But now I get the best access possible for the top ball joint to come out. So now all I have to do is figure out which direction to remove it, and off it comes. Okay, now separating the top ball joint is just another fork use situation. I am going to use the same fork as here because the ball joints seem to have the same size of of thread. So if this one works for one, it should work for the other one as well. That was surprisingly easy. And off does the hub come. And we can park it aside. to continue removing the suspension. Now, I'm gonna start by this one here. It's the bolt that goes and attaches the roll bar to the spring and to the lower control arm. Yeah, I think truck control arm. Again, a job that I've done in the past. I'm not expecting a lot of resistance from this nut. You can see that the nut is actually fairly new. Okay, the whole nut is rotating now. I need to use an X head on the opposite side to stop it. Okay, so for my own records, I have one spacer here, and then on the other side I have, you probably can't see with the camera, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spacers, the joining brace to there, which I'm going to remove now. Might as well remove it while it's held by something. One spacer on the top of the anti-roll bar, and then there are 4 spacers on the bottom. But I'm just putting everything back in so that I don't lose anything in the future and I know what goes where. This is the anti-roll bar out from here. All I have to do is unlock it, remove it from the drop link. And from this side, I just need to remove this big bolt, which is straightforward coming out, no problems. Lock the spacers in place, put the nut back in so that I don't lose anything. These 3 nuts also go back into their respective ball joints so that I don't lose them. And now I can lower the, well, I could lower the wishbone, but I can't because of my axle stands. So I'm not going to lower the wishbone, I'm just going to see what I can do with the pieces as they are. For the lower truck control arm and its angled support frame, I just need to remove the 2 bolts from there, and then deattach them in here and in here. And I don't think the order is very relevant because everything needs to come out. So I'm just gonna start from those because they look like a weaker connection, and they could break if I have everything else loose. So I'm going to remove those 2 first, and then remove the front and finally the rear. Also, the camera here can film those 2 with a bit of luck, or not, where I only need to position the camera once in the end of this. One out, 1 to go. So that's those attachments done. Now I'm going to start from the front and move back. Remove these 2 nuts and then pull through, and then I'll have to reposition the camera. Actually, the camera is not very good for this. Then I'll have to reposition the camera for the ones on the back, but yeah, just doing these 2, which are very, very rusty, so I may have problems here. Okay, so I've got a phone call in the meanwhile, and I kind of lost track of what I was doing in the video, but that's free now. So instead of moving towards the back, I am moving towards the upper side because the camera is already pointing at it, hopefully. So this nut needs to come out, the equivalent nut on this side needs to come out. It's just a matter of getting started. So after I cleaned up the rod here, it took me a while to figure out that this particular part of the car is actually a single rod that has two nuts on one side and a single nut on the opposite side. And if you're not careful, you end up spinning the rod instead of actually removing the nuts. So it took me a bit of time to figure that out, and when I finally figured that out, I realized that I had to remove a single nut from one of the sides and then separate the half of the top wishbone in order to remove that, and then push the rod to the opposite side to get a little bit more clearance, and then remove the other side. So by the time you get to the end of this fast forward, this half that you're currently looking at on the side closer to the camera is coming out, and then I had to push the rod to the opposite side and clear the nut from the opposite side, push the rod back in, and finally remove the other half of the wishbone. I hopefully will be able to explain this in better detail when I refit the wishbone in a later video. Unfortunately, as I was trying to figure out things as I was doing this video, I wasn't able to actually explain it in front of the camera. You can see me messing around with the nuts and then eventually getting to this point that you see here. A couple of, I believe, 10 mils, they may be 8 mils, but the bracket just has a couple of fasteners holding it in place. Now that I have that loose, this should just come out by itself without much of a trouble. There it is. That's the other suspension arm. Now, I'm not going to show this on camera, and this is because the other side happened this, and it seems to be a common issue, I've been told. These are hardened steel, 10 or 11.9 grade. Now, if you don't know what that means, just the most steel that you have in bolts is 8.8 grade, and then you get the 10.9 and the 11.9, or maybe it's 12.9, I don't know the number exactly, but there's two other numbers that are fairly common, which are harder types of steel. So these bolts are the harder type of steel, either the 10.9 or the 11/12, whatever, and you can't drill through them. Well, you can drill through them, but not with the stuff that you have in your garage. And they commonly seize inside of the top ball joint. And if you can't spin this to rotate them, it means they're seized. And I've not tried this, as you've seen from the camera, but I'm assuming that they are because the opposite side is. So what I will be doing to this is try to remove it, and if I can't remove it, grind off the heads of the bolts and take the ball joint out, and then just put a new ball joint back in. It's an unfortunate expense that I have to take from doing this job, but I'm just trying to save my Elan in the long run, so it's the way to go. We're now underneath the car. This is the supporting arm to the track control arm. I'm kind of hoping that you can see from the image that this is the joining place that I've undone earlier. This is the second joining place, and this is a track control arm here. This is a supporting arm, and it's held in place by two nuts, one nut and one bolt, and the nut is a 19 mil, as you can see here, and the bolt, I think it's also a 19 mil. Yeah, it is a 19 mil. This should be a straightforward task to remove. Just hold on to the bolt and undo the nut. This should come off by hand now. That's the nut, washer. Don't need to remove the supporting bracket. And the bolt comes out. Now, if everything is right, with a minimum amount of leverage, I should be able to pull this out. Sure that things are broken loose, and there it is. The triangulation arm, I think that's the technical name for this one, is out now. And now I just need to look into that one there. Okay, so I've got the floor jack holding the car weight, and I'm just having my axle stand here for extra measure of safety. And you can see the nut from the track control arm, and you can, well, you can't see the bolt, but the bolt is on the opposite side. So we'll just get started with this one now. One nut, one washer, one bolt, and now the whole track control arm comes out. Another thing to do is the drop links, which have in the passenger side the air intake hose is right in front of them. So for the courtesy of YouTube, I will be pulling the air intake hose out. There is a drop link. There's one bolt there that bolts into the chassis, and then a nut and bolt combination down here. You gotta keep in mind one thing: I don't have the clamshell or the bumper in my way now, so access is actually very easy. But if you have the clamshell and the bumper in the car still, you're gonna find a bit restricted access. The clamshell goes around here, I think, and then the bumper is going around here, so all of this area here will be used up by those things. Okay, there's the bolt coming out. And now, since I've done the other side, the drop link, what's the name of this again? The anti-roll bar is completely free. So now it's just a matter of carefully removing it from the car without damaging anything else. And at this point we should be rolling in the Benny Hill theme song, because it turns out that the height that I have my cars jacked wasn't high enough to actually remove the anti-roll bar as it was. So you'll just see me struggling here for a minute, and ultimately, after a couple of hours of trying to figure out my way, I just decided to remove the under tray from the car, which I did that off the camera. But so we'll be rolling forward into just removing the drop link afterwards. But in order to remove this, if your car is not jacked up high enough, you will have to just remove the subframe. So moving on. Right, so the last thing to do is to remove that bolt there. Again, 17 mil. Should be fairly easy to access if you have the right tools. But yeah, that's the drop link out. Now for the anti-roll bar, I've spent a good 20 minutes trying to remove it in front of the camera. I haven't figured out how to remove it yet. It would be easier if the car was jacked up higher, but you can't do that in a garage or in your own garage. So I will have to figure that one out, and you're gonna have to figure that one out yourself. I'm not gonna record more of that because 20 minutes of struggling around with a bar is just ridiculous. And I'm not going to figure out how to do it until it's actually done. So with that in mind, I have, apart from the roll bar, everything of the suspension out. Got the drop links, I got the track control arm, the triangulation arm, the two halves of the wishbone out, and this will come out also the camera. So yeah, that's it for this video, and thanks for watching.